Picture this, you're living in 2035 and your household humanoid robot just broke down. You call for a replacement, but the customer service rep tells you there's a 3-year waiting list. Why? Because the rare earth magnets needed for its actuators are expensive, difficult to mine, and process into finished goods, and the only place to get them is controlled by a country that's not exactly thrilled about selling them to you. Sound far-fetched? Well, buckle up, because this scenario is closer to reality than you might think. Here's a mind-blowing fact that should make every tech executive lose sleep. By 2040, robotics will become the single largest consumer of rare earth magnets on the planet. We're talking about a demand explosion that will make the current EV boom look like a gentle breeze. And here's the kicker. China controls roughly 90% of the world's rare earth magnet production. That's not just a supply chain issue, that's a geopolitical time bomb waiting to explode. Welcome to Apprentice.io's Industry Insights. I'm Frank Maggiore, and today we're diving into what might be the most critical challenge facing the robotics industry today. How do we build billions of robots when the materials needed to make them move are controlled by a single country that's increasingly at odds with the rest of the world? But here's where it gets really interesting and why I'm so excited to share this with you today. While everyone else is scrambling to find new mines and build new supply chains, a group of brilliant scientists and engineers are asking a completely different question. What if we could just grow our way out of the problem and make the actuators instead of mining them? That's right, we're talking about bioactuators, living muscle tissue that can power robots. And before you start thinking this sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, let me tell you, this technology is already working in labs around the world. And it might just be the key to solving the rare earth crisis that threatens to strangle the robotics industry in its crib. Think about it this way. Every time you lift your coffee cup, flex your bicep, or even blink your eyes, you're witnessing actuators that are more sophisticated, more efficient, and more adaptable than anything we've ever built. Your muscles can repair themselves, they run on sugar and oxygen, and they can work continuously for decades without maintenance. Now imagine we could harness that biological brilliance to power the robots of the future. No rare earth magnets, no dependence on foreign supply chains, no mining operations destroying the environment, just cells growing in bioreactors powered by the same biological processes that have been perfected over millions of years of evolution. The rare earth crisis isn't just about money, though we're talking about a market that's expected to grow fivefold by 2040. It's about national security, technological sovereignty, and the future of automation itself. Countries are already weaponizing rare earth exports, and the race is on to find alternatives before the entire robotics industry becomes a geopolitical chess piece. But here's what gets me really excited about this topic. We're not just talking about replacing one technology with another. We're talking about a fundamental reimagining of how robots work. Instead of rigid, energy-hungry machines that break down and need constant maintenance, we're looking at robots that could be soft, adaptable, self-healing, and powered by biological processes that are inherently sustainable. The companies and researchers working on this technology aren't just solving a supply chain problem, they're potentially creating the foundation for a completely new generation of robotics. And the manufacturing challenges? Well, that's where cloud-based manufacturing execution systems and advanced bioprocessing come into play, creating opportunities for entirely new industries. Today, we're going to explore how scientists are turning living cells into robotic actuators, why this technology might be the key for breaking free from rare earth dependence, and what it means for the future of robotics, manufacturing, and geopolitics. We'll look at the science, the business implications, and the manufacturing challenges that need to be solved. Trust me, by the end of this episode, you'll never look at your own muscles the same way again. And you might just see the future of robotics growing in a petri dish rather than being mined from the ground. So let's dive in and explore how biology might just save the robotics revolution. Let's start with some numbers that should make every robotics company CEO wake up in a cold sweat. According to Atomos Intelligence, the global demand for rare earth magnets is projected to increase fivefold by 2040. And here's the really scary part. Robotics are going from being a tiny blip on the radar to becoming the single largest consumer of these materials. We're not talking about your grandmother's Roomba here. The robotics industry is on the verge of an explosion that will make the smartphone revolution look quaint. Tesla's Elon Musk is predicting that humanoid robots will outnumber humans by 2040. Chinese startup Agibot just started mass production of humanoid robots in Shanghai, aiming for 100 units per month. And that's just the beginning. Each of these robots needs multiple high-performance actuators. Think of them as the muscles that make the robots move. And virtually every high-performance actuator relies on rare earth magnets, specifically neodymium ion boron magnets. These aren't just any magnets, they're the Ferrari of the magnet world, providing incredible power density and precision control. But here's where the math gets terrifying. A single humanoid robot might need 50 to 100 individual actuators. We're talking about billions of robots by 2040. We're looking at demand of rare earth magnets that could dwarf every other application combined. Electric vehicles, which currently dominate rare earth consumption, would look like a side note compared to the robotics boom. Now let's talk geography, because this is where the story gets potentially catastrophic for Western robotic companies. China doesn't just have a competitive advantage in rare earth production, they have a near monopoly. We're talking about 90% of global rare earth magnet production happening in one country. Think about that for a moment. Imagine if 90% of the world's steel, oil, or semiconductors came from a single country. Well, we can see that with Taiwan for advanced microchips, and that's already a very scary bottleneck. That's essentially where we are with the materials that make robots move. And it's not just about mining. China also controls about 90% of the processing capabilities that turn raw rare earth ore into high-performance magnets that robots need. The geopolitical implications are staggering. In 2024, China formalized export restrictions on rare earth processing technology and machinery. They're essentially saying, not only do we control the supply, but we're also not going to help you build your own. It's like controlling both the oil wells and the refineries. And here's the kicker. For the most critical applications, like high-temperature actuators that work under a car's hood or industrial settings, you need special rare earth elements called dysprosium and terbium. China controls practically 100% of the global supply of these materials. When they restricted exports of these elements in April 2024, it sent shockwaves through the automotive and robotics industries. Remember what happened in 2010? China briefly restricted rare earth exports during a territorial dispute with Japan, and it nearly brought Japan's auto industry to its knees. Now imagine that scenario, but instead of affecting just cars, it affects every robot, every AI-powered manufacturing system, every autonomous vehicle, and every piece of advanced automation equipment. The timeline makes this even more urgent. Most projections show robotics demand for rare earth magnets exploding between 2030 and 2040. But building alternative supply chains may take decades. The Mountain Pass mine in California, America's main rare earth source, took years to restart after Chinese competition shut it down. And even when it's fully operational, it can't produce the heavy rare earths needed for high-performance actuators. This isn't just an economic issue, it's a national security nightmare. The U.S. Department of Defense has identified rare earth magnets as critical to everything from F-35 fighter jets to guided missile systems. The same magnets that will power tomorrow's robots are essential for today's military technology. And we're not just talking about supply shortages, we're talking about the potential for technology sanctions that could cripple entire industries overnight. If geopolitical tensions escalate, countries could find themselves unable to build the robots they need for manufacturing, healthcare, elder care, and countless other applications. The economic implications are mind-boggling. The International Energy Agency estimates that meeting global climate goals alone will require a six-fold increase in rare earth production by 2040. Add the robotics boom on top of that, and you're looking at demand that could outstrip supply by orders of magnitude. And here's the really scary part. Unlike other materials, rare earth magnets can't be easily recycled or substituted. Once they're in a robot, they're essentially locked in for the life of that device. We're talking about a truly finite resource that becomes more valuable and more strategically important with each passing year. This is why what we're going to discuss today is so crucial, because while everyone else is fighting over the same limited supply of rare earth materials, a small group of researchers and companies are working on a completely different approach. They're asking, what if we didn't need to mine these materials at all? What if we could grow our robot actuators instead? That's where bioactuators come in, and why this technology might be the key to preventing the rare earth crisis from strangling the robotics revolution before it even begins. So what exactly is a bioactuator? At its core, it's a biological system that converts chemical energy into mechanical work, just like your muscles do every time you move. But instead of being part of a living organism, these muscle tissues are grown in labs and are integrated into artificial devices to create what scientists call biohybrid systems. Think of it this way: your bicep is essentially a biological actuator that's been optimized by millions of years of evolution. It can contract with incredible force, it repairs itself when damaged, it runs on glucose and oxygen, and it can work continuously for decades. Now imagine that same biological brilliance and putting it to work in a robot. There are three main types of bioactuators, each with their own superpowers and limitations. Let's break them down. First up, we have muscle-based bioactuators. These are the closest thing to science fiction becoming reality. Researchers take actual muscle cells, usually from mice, but sometimes from other animals, and grow them into functional muscle tissue in the lab. The most common approach uses skeletal muscle cells, which are the same type that power your arms and legs. Here's where it gets really cool. These lab-grown muscles behave almost exactly like natural muscles. They contract when stimulated electrically, they can generate significant force, and they can even heal themselves when damaged. MIT's Rutu Raman has shown that these muscle-powered robots can actually get stronger through exercise. It's just like going to the gym. But skeletal muscle isn't the only option. Scientists have also experimented with cardiac muscle cells, the type that power your heart. These cells have the amazing property of contracting spontaneously, creating a natural rhythm without any external stimulation. Imagine a robot that moves with a steady, reliable beat of a heart. Then there's the really wild stuff, insect muscle tissue. Researchers have discovered that muscle tissue from certain insects, particularly moth larvae, can operate at room temperature for months without any special care. We're talking about biological actuators that are tougher than most artificial systems and can work in conditions that would kill mammalian cells. The second major category is organic bioactuators, where organic or inorganic materials can be manufactured by a living organism or from the byproducts of a living organism to produce materials like hydrogel-based bioactuators. These might sound less exciting than living muscle, but they're actually incredibly sophisticated. These are smart materials that can change shape in response to environmental stimuli like temperature, pH, light, or electrical fields. The genius of hydrogel bioactuators is their programmability. Scientists can engineer them to respond to specific triggers, making them perfect applications like drug delivery systems or responsive medical devices. They're like biological robots that can sense their environment and react accordingly. The third category is where things get really interesting: hybrid systems that combine both living tissue with artificial components. These biohybrid robots use the best of both worlds: the adaptability and efficiency of biological systems with the precision and control of engineered components. Now you might be wondering, how do these compare to traditional electromagnetic actuators? The differences are pretty remarkable. Traditional actuators work by using electricity to create magnetic fields that move permanent magnets. They're fast, precise, and powerful, but they're also energy hungry, prone to wear and tear, and completely dependent on rare earth materials. Bioactuators work on completely different principles. They use the same biochemical processes that power your muscles, the interactions between the proteins called actin and myosin, powered by a molecule called ATP. When a muscle cell receives an electrical signal, calcium ions are released, which causes these proteins to slide past each other, creating contraction. The performance comparison is fascinating. Traditional actuators can generate tremendous force and move incredibly fast. We're talking about forces measured in hundreds of newtons and speeds measured in meters per second. Bioactuators, on the other hand, are currently much more modest in their performance. A typical muscle-based bioactuator might generate forces in the millinewton range and move at speeds measured in micrometers per second. But here's where it gets interesting. Bioactuators excel in areas where traditional actuators struggle. They're incredibly efficient, converting chemical energy directly into mechanical work without the energy losses you see in electromagnetic systems. They can operate silently, which is crucial for many applications. And they have this amazing property of being inherently compliant. They can adapt to their environment and absorb impacts without damage. Perhaps most importantly, bioactuators have properties that no artificial system can match. They can self-repair when damaged, they can adapt and get stronger over time, and they can operate using renewable biological fuels. Imagine a robot that could literally eat sugar to power itself. Biology has already solved many of these challenges we're trying to tackle with engineering. The question isn't whether bioactuators can replace traditional actuators in every application. They probably can't, at least not in the near term. The question is whether they can create entirely new possibilities for robotics and automation while simultaneously reducing our dependence on rare earth materials. Let's dive into the nuts and bolts of how this technology actually works, because the engineering behind bioactuators is absolutely fascinating. We're essentially reverse engineering millions of years of evolutionary optimization and putting it to work in artificial systems, starting with muscle-based bioactuators. The process is like growing a biological factory. Scientists typically start with myoblasts. These are the precursor cells that develop into muscle tissue. Think of them as biological stem cells that are destined to become muscle. These cells are harvested, usually from laboratory mice, and then cultured in specialized growth media that provides all the nutrients they need to multiply and differentiate. The really clever part is how researchers guide these cells to form functional muscle tissues. They use scaffolds, essentially biological frameworks that give the cell structure and direction. These scaffolds can be made from natural materials like collagen or synthetic materials that are designed to dissolve away as the muscle tissue matures. And here's where it gets really impressive. Once the muscle cells are in the right environment, they start doing what they're programmed to do. They align themselves, fuse together into long multinucleated fibers called myotubes, and begin producing the contractile proteins that make muscle work. Within a few days, you've got a functional muscle tissue that can contract in response to electrical stimulation. But not all muscle tissue is created equal. Skeletal muscle, the type that moves your arms and legs, is the most common choice for bioactuators because it's highly controllable. You can turn it on and off with electrical pulses, and it generates significant force. The downside? It needs constant stimulation to work, and it requires precise environmental conditions to stay healthy. Cardiac muscle, on the other hand, is like having a built-in pacemaker. These cells naturally contract in a rhythmic pattern, creating a steady, reliable motion without any external control. This makes them perfect for applications like pumping systems or robots that need continuous, rhythmic movements. The challenge is that you can't easily turn them off or control their timing. Now here's where things get really interesting: insect muscle tissue. This is probably the most underrated bioactuator technology out there. Researchers have discovered that muscle tissue from certain insects, particularly the dorsal vessel tissue from moth larvae, has some incredible properties. This tissue can operate at room temperature for over 90 days without any medium replacement. Let me repeat that: over 90 days at room temperature with no maintenance at all. Most mammalian muscle tissue would die within hours under those conditions. Japanese researchers have shown that insect muscle can generate contractile forces of about 4.7 micronewtons and operate across a wide range of temperatures and pH conditions. The secret sauce is that insects are incredibly hardy creatures. They've evolved to survive in harsh environments, and their muscle tissue reflects that robustness. Some insects can survive being frozen solid, operate in extreme temperatures, and tolerate conditions that would kill most mammals. When you harvest muscle tissue from these creatures, you are getting actuators that are inherently more durable than anything we could engineer. Speed is another limitation. Most bioactuators operate at frequencies well below 1 Hz. That's less than 1 contraction per second. Traditional actuators can operate at frequencies of thousands of hertz. So, if you need a rapid, precise movements, current bioactuators aren't going to cut it just yet. But here's where the comparison gets more interesting. In terms of efficiency, bioactuators are remarkably good. They convert chemical energy directly into mechanical work with very little waste heat. Traditional actuators lose significant energy as heat, especially at high speeds. Bioactuators can also operate continuously for extended periods without fatigue, something that's challenging for many artificial systems. The power-to-weight ratio is also impressive. Muscle tissue can generate about 300 kilopascals of stress. That's roughly equivalent to the pressure in a car tire. When you consider that muscle tissue is mostly water and weighs much less than metal actuators, the power-to-weight ratio is actually quite competitive. But perhaps the most impressive performance metric is longevity. Properly maintained muscle tissue can operate for weeks or even months. The insect muscle tissue I mentioned earlier has been shown to work over 90 days continuously. That's longer than many electronic components can without any maintenance. The real breakthrough comes when you start thinking about applications where bioactuators' unique properties are actually advantages. For soft robotics applications where you need actuators that can safely interact with humans or delicate objects, the inherent compliance of muscle tissue is a huge advantage. Traditional actuators can exert dangerous forces if they malfunction. Bioactuators are inherently safe. Now let's talk about what might be the most promising development in the entire bioactuator space: synthetic spider silk. And there's one company that's been quietly perfecting this technology for over a decade: Bolt Threads, now trading as Bolt Project Holdings Inc., BSLK. While Bolt Threads has struggled commercially with consumer textile products and cosmetics, their core technology represents perhaps the most scalable and practical solution for bioactuators. Here's why synthetic spider silk is absolutely essential for the future of bioactuators and why we cannot afford to let this company fail. Spider silk exhibits incredible mechanical properties that make it ideal for actuator applications. And it's not just for Spider-Man. MIT researchers have discovered that spider silk can achieve up to 2,550 degrees of twist per millimeter when exposed to humidity changes. That's comparable to carbon nanotube artificial muscles. But unlike carbon nanotubes, spider silk can be grown sustainably in fermentation tanks. The tensile strength of spider silk rivals that of steel, but it's incredibly light and has this amazing ability to contract and twist in response to environmental conditions. When you combine these properties with mechanical advantage systems like pulleys and levers, you can amplify small movements into large, powerful actuations. Bolt Threads has spent over a decade and hundreds of millions of dollars perfecting the fermentation process to produce spider silk proteins at scale. They've demonstrated they can produce tons of material annually, infrastructure that can be rapidly converted from textile to actuator production. Here's why Bolt Threads is an indispensable company. They are proven at scale. They're the only Western company with demonstrated industrial scale spider silk production with over 3,000 kilograms of production in 2024. They have the technical expertise with over a decade of experience optimizing the fermentation and purification processes. They have the infrastructure and CMO partners with existing fermentation facilities. They have the intellectual property portfolio with comprehensive patents covering production processes and applications. And they have the strategic importance where their technology could free the Western robotics industry from Chinese rare earth dependency. The company's current financial struggles stem from them being too early in the consumer textile market. But for robotics applications, their timing is perfect. The spider silk they produce has all the properties needed for high-performance actuators, including incredible strength-to-weight ratio, predictable responses to environmental stimuli, long-term stability, scalable production using renewable feedstocks, and no dependence on rare earth materials. When combined with mechanical amplification systems, spider silk actuators could achieve forced outputs competitive with traditional electromagnetic actuators. A single spider silk fiber that contracts by 5% can drive pulley systems with 10-to-1 or even 100-to-1 mechanical advantage, turning that small contraction into powerful movements. The national security implications are enormous. If the West loses Bolt Threads' capabilities to bankruptcy, we're essentially handing China another monopoly, this time on the only proven alternative to rare earth actuators. The cost of letting this company fail far exceeds the cost of supporting it through strategic investment. Bolt Threads, the current poster child of bioindustrials and a company for leading the biotech century, where most important materials come out of bioreactors. They represent our best shot at growing our way out of the rare earth crisis. They have the technology, the infrastructure, and the expertise. What they need is recognition of their strategic importance and the support to pivot their proven spider silk production towards bioactuator applications. The key insight here is that we're not trying to replace electromagnetic actuators one for one. We're creating entirely new categories of actuator systems that take advantage of the unique properties of biomanufactured materials. It's like the difference between trying to make a better horse and buggy versus inventing the automobile. We're not just improving existing technology, we're creating a world of new possibilities. Nature has already shown us how to amplify the power of biological actuators through hydraulic systems. The Venus flytrap is a perfect example. It uses hydraulic pressure changes to snap shut in less than a second, generating forces far exceeding what its cellular structure alone could produce. By rapidly moving water between cells, the plant creates a hydraulic amplification system that turns small cellular movements into powerful mechanical action. Researchers are now applying these same principles to bioactuators using biological systems to drive hydraulic circuits that can amplify forces by factors of 100-to-1 or more. This biomimetic approach could enable bioactuators to achieve the power levels needed for industrial applications while maintaining their inherent advantages of sustainability and self-repair. The future possibilities are even more exciting. We're seeing research into hybrid biomechanical systems that combine biological control with mechanical amplification. Smart fluid systems that use magnetorheological fluids controlled by bioactuators. Phase-change materials that can store and release energy based on biological triggers. The key insight here is that we're not just replacing one technology for another. We're creating entirely new categories of power systems that leverage the unique properties of biological materials. It's like the difference between improving the steam engines and inventing electric motors. We're not just making better hydraulic systems, we're creating biological power systems that happen to use hydraulic amplification. This represents a fundamental shift in how we think about robotics and automation. Instead of fighting against biology, we're learning to work with it. Instead of depleting finite resources, we're harnessing renewable biological processes. Instead of creating technologies that are alien to the natural world, we're developing systems that are inherently compatible with life. The timeline for commercial deployment is probably 5 to 10 years for specialized applications, with broader adoption following as the technology matures and costs decrease. But the potential impact is enormous. We're talking about the possibility of creating robotic systems that are more powerful, more efficient, and more sustainable than anything we have today. Manufacturing bioactuators is unlike anything we've done before in industrial production. We're not stamping metal or molding plastic. We're essentially farming muscle tissue at industrial scale. It's like trying to run a cattle ranch inside a semiconductor fab, and the challenges are absolutely mind-boggling. The process begins with what's called a seed stock, essentially a starter culture of muscle cells that will become your bioactuator. These cells need to be grown in specialized bioreactors that can provide precisely controlled environments. The bioreactor is essentially a high-tech incubator on steroids. It also needs to provide mechanical stimulation to help the muscle tissue develop properly, because just like human muscles, these tissues need exercise to grow strong. Some systems use electrical stimulation to make the developing muscles contract, while others use mechanical stretching systems that literally work out the muscle as it grows. The quality control challenges are absolutely staggering. How do you test the performance of living tissue without destroying it? Traditional manufacturing can take samples and test them to destruction, but with bioactuators, you need non-invasive testing methods that can verify performance without damaging the product. This is where advanced imaging and sensing technologies come in. Researchers are using techniques like optical coherence tomography to examine the internal structure of muscle tissue systems, electrical impedance measurements to assess cell health, and mechanical testing systems that can measure contractile force without damaging the tissue. The consistency problem is even more challenging. Living systems are inherently variable. No two muscle tissues are exactly identical, even when grown under identical conditions. This means that manufacturers need to develop statistical process control methods that can account for biological variability while still ensuring that products meet performance specifications. But here's where it gets really interesting. The role of manufacturing execution systems becomes absolutely crucial. We're not just tracking parts and materials, we're tracking living systems that can change over time. Every batch of cells has a genealogy, every culture medium has expiration dates, and every environmental parameter needs to be monitored continuously. Cloud-based manufacturing execution systems are particularly valuable for bioactuator manufacturing because they can handle the incredible complexity of managing biological processes. These systems need to track not just what happened, but when it happened, because timing is everything in biology. A cell culture that's a day too old might not differentiate properly. A growth medium that's been sitting at room temperature for too long might not support cell growth. The traceability requirements are unlike anything seen in traditional manufacturing. If there's a problem with a bioreactor batch, you need to be able to trace it back, not just to the specific cells that were used, but to the environmental conditions they were exposed to, the growth factors that were added, and even the specific technician who handled the culture. The supply chain considerations are also unique. Traditional manufacturing deals with stable raw materials that can be stored for months or even years. Bioactuator manufacturing requires fresh cell culture media that might have a shelf life of days, growth factors that need to be stored at specific temperatures, and cells that need to be used within specific time frames. The economics are also challenging. Current estimates suggest that producing muscle tissue for bioactuators could cost hundreds of dollars per gram. That's orders of magnitude more expensive than traditional actuator materials. But the costs are dropping rapidly as the technology matures and begins to scale up. The shelf life considerations are also unique. Traditional actuators can be stored for years without degradation. Bioactuators might need to be used within days or weeks of production, or they might need to be stored under specialized conditions that maintain their viability. Some manufacturers are developing preservation techniques that can extend the shelf life of bioactuators. These might include cryopreservation methods that can freeze the tissue in a viable state, or dehydration techniques that can create stable, dormant forms that can be reactivated when needed. The future of bioactuator manufacturing will likely involve highly automated systems that can handle the complexity of biological processes while maintaining the precision and consistency for commercial production. We're talking about systems that combine robotics, advanced sensing, and artificial intelligence to manufacture biological processes at industrial scales. This is where the convergence of biotechnology and manufacturing technology becomes really exciting. The same companies that are developing advanced bioprocessing equipment for pharmaceutical production are now adapting their technologies for bioactuator manufacturing. Let's talk about who's actually building this stuff, because the bioactuator space is filled with some of the most innovative researchers and companies I've ever encountered. And I've got to say, many of them are flying under the radar of the mainstream tech media, which is crazy because they're potentially developing the technologies that will power the next generation of robotics. Starting with the academic pioneers, MIT's Ritu Raman is probably the most well-known name in the field. Her lab has developed some of the most impressive muscle-powered robots to date, including systems that can actually exercise and get stronger over time. But what really sets her work apart is the engineering approach. She's not just growing muscle tissues, she's engineering it for specific applications. Her team has developed what they call flexure-based skeletons for biohybrid robots. Instead of using soft materials that behave differently at different speeds, they use precisely engineered mechanical structures that provide consistent performance. This has allowed them to create robots that generate 5 times larger movements than previous designs. The University of Illinois has also been a major player, with Roger Bashir's group developing some of the most sophisticated biohybrid systems. They've created robots that can walk, swim, and even perform basic computational tasks using muscle tissue. Their work on optogenetic control using light to control muscle contraction has opened up possibilities for wireless control of bioactuators. But it's not just American universities. Japanese researchers have been particularly innovative in the insect muscle space. Teams at Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology have developed bioactuators using dorsal vessel tissue from moth larvae that can operate for over 90 days at room temperature. Now let's talk about the companies that are trying to commercialize this technology, and this is where things get really interesting because we're seeing different approaches to the same fundamental challenge. CellLink, a Swedish company, has positioned themselves as the infrastructure provider for the bioactuator industry. They're developing the bioprinters and bioinks that other companies need to create their bioactuators. It's like being the picks and shovel supplier during the gold rush, probably a smart strategy. Aspect Biosystems, based in Canada, has been working on tissue engineering applications that could extend into bioactuator development. They've developed some of the most advanced bioprinting technologies available, which could be adapted for muscle tissue production. The medical device space is where we're seeing the most immediate commercial applications. Companies like Organovo have been developing bioprinted tissues for drug testing and regenerative medicine applications. While they're not specifically targeting bioactuators, their tissue engineering capabilities could easily be adapted for actuator applications. In the material space, companies like Bolt Threads are developing bio-based materials that could be adapted for bioactuator applications. They're primarily focused on textiles and cosmetics right now, but their expertise in growing and processing biological materials could be invaluable for bioactuator development. The defense and aerospace sectors are also showing interest. While most of the work is classified, there are hints that organizations like DARPA are funding research into bioactuator applications for military systems. The advantages of silent, self-repairing actuators are obvious for certain defense applications. But let's talk about applications where bioactuators are actually showing promise. The medical device space is probably the most obvious fit. Traditional actuators and medical devices need to be biocompatible, which often means using expensive materials and coatings. Bioactuators are inherently biocompatible, which could open up new possibilities for implantable devices. Think about artificial hearts. Current artificial hearts use electromagnetic pumps that are bulky, power-hungry, and prone to failure. A bioactuator-based artificial heart could potentially be more efficient, quieter, and more biocompatible than current systems. Prosthetics is another obvious application. Current prosthetic limbs use electromagnetic actuators that are heavy, power-hungry, and provide limited tactile feedback. Bioactuators could potentially provide more natural movement patterns and even some degree of sensory feedback. But the applications extend far beyond medicine. Soft robotics is probably the most promising near-term application. Traditional robots are dangerous to work around because they can exert tremendous forces. Bioactuators are inherently compliant, which makes them safer for human-robot interactions. Think about elder care robots. These systems need to be able to handle fragile humans safely, which means they need actuators that can provide gentle, controlled movements. Bioactuators could be perfect for these types of applications. The market potential is enormous, but it's also highly uncertain. Current estimates suggest that the global actuator market is worth about $50 billion annually. If bioactuators can capture even a small fraction of that market, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. But the timeline is uncertain. Most experts suggest that commercial bioactuator applications are still 5 to 10 years away. Medical applications might come sooner because the regulatory pathways are more established, but industrial applications will likely take longer. The investment landscape is also evolving. Traditional venture capital firms are starting to look at bioactuator companies, but the technology is still too early for most investors. The companies that are getting funded are primarily those with near-term medical applications or those developing the infrastructure that the industry will need. Government funding is also playing a role. The U.S. National Science Foundation has been funding bioactuator research for years, and other countries are following suit. The European Union's Horizon Europe program includes funding for biohybrid robotics research. The intellectual property landscape is also developing. While the basic concepts of bioactuators are well established, the specific techniques for growing, controlling, and integrating these systems are still being developed. Companies that can develop proprietary techniques for producing high-performance bioactuators could have significant competitive advantages. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of the bioactuator industry is the interdisciplinary nature. Success requires expertise in biology, engineering, materials science, and manufacturing. This means that the companies that succeed will likely be those that can effectively integrate these different disciplines. The companies that can effectively bridge this gap will likely be the ones with first-mover advantages. Alright, let's get real about the challenges facing bioactuators, because while I'm incredibly optimistic about this technology, I'm not going to sugarcoat the very real obstacles that need to be overcome. The first and most obvious challenge is power density. When I say that current bioactuators generate forces in the millinewton range, I need to put that in perspective. A typical servo motor in a robot arm can generate hundreds of newtons of force. That's literally 1,000,000 times more powerful than most current bioactuators. It's like comparing a firefly to a searchlight in terms of raw output. To put this in even starker terms, the strongest muscle-based bioactuators can generate about 300 kilopascals of stress. That's impressive for biological tissue, but it's still orders of magnitude less than what hydraulic or pneumatic actuators can produce. If you're trying to build a robot that can lift heavy objects or move at high speeds, current organic bioactuators simply aren't going to cut it. The speed issue is equally challenging. Most bioactuators operate at frequencies well below 1 Hz. Traditional actuators can operate at frequencies of thousands of hertz. This means that organic bioactuators are currently limited to applications that don't require rapid, precise movements. You're not going to see organic bioactuator-powered robot arms on automotive assembly lines anytime soon. Now let's talk about scalability challenges, because this is where the rubber really meets the road. Growing muscle tissue in a lab is one thing. Producing it at scale needed for commercial applications is entirely different. Current tissue engineering techniques can produce muscle tissue in quantities measured in grams. Commercial applications might need quantities measured in kilograms or even tons. The economics are also challenging. Current estimates suggest that producing muscle tissue for bioactuators could cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars per gram. Compare that to most rare earth magnets, which cost maybe $50 to $100 per kilogram. Even accounting for the performance differences, bioactuators are currently orders of magnitude more expensive than traditional actuators. The cost structure is also fundamentally different. Traditional actuators might have high upfront costs, but low operating costs. Bioactuators may have lower upfront costs, but require continuous inputs of nutrients, growth factors, and environmental control. The total cost of ownership could be very different from traditional systems. Quality control presents enormous challenges. How do you ensure that living tissue meets performance specifications? Traditional manufacturing can test samples to destruction, but with bioactuators, you need non-invasive testing methods that can verify performance without damaging the product. The regulatory landscape is also uncertain. Traditional actuators are straightforward engineering products. Bioactuators exist in a gray area between medical devices, biological products, and industrial equipment. Regulatory agencies are still developing frameworks for these hybrid systems, which creates uncertainty for companies trying to commercialize their technology. Safety considerations are also complex. Traditional actuators fail in predictable ways. They just stop working, overheat, or break mechanically. Bioactuators could potentially fail in biological ways that are harder to predict or to detect. What happens if the tissue becomes infected? What if it starts producing unwanted biological compounds? The integration challenges are also significant. Bioactuators don't just plug into existing robotic systems. They need specialized control systems, power supplies, and environmental controls. This means that companies developing bioactuator-based systems need to essentially redesign their entire architecture. The control systems are particularly challenging. Traditional actuators can be controlled with simple voltage or current signals. Bioactuators might need complex biochemical signals, precise timing, and sophisticated feedback systems to operate properly. The control algorithms for biological systems are fundamentally different from those for mechanical systems. The intellectual property landscape is also complex. While the basic concepts of bioactuators are well established, the specific techniques for growing, controlling, and integrating these systems are still being developed. This creates uncertainty about patent protection and competitive positioning. The talent shortage is also a significant challenge. Developing bioactuators requires expertise in biology, engineering, material science, and manufacturing. There are very few people with the interdisciplinary knowledge needed to work effectively in this field. But perhaps the most fundamental challenge is the valley of death between research and commercialization. Most bioactuator research is still happening in academic laboratories, but commercial development requires industrial expertise, manufacturing capabilities, and significant capital investment. Bridging this gap is always challenging for emerging technologies. But the key point is that these challenges are real and they need to be addressed before bioactuators can become commercially viable for most applications. The companies and researchers working in this field need to be realistic about the timelines and about the obstacles that they face. As we reach the end of our journey through the fascinating world of bioactuators, I want to step back and take a look at the bigger picture. Because what we're really talking about here isn't just a new type of actuator. We're potentially witnessing the birth of an entirely new paradigm for how we think about robotics, manufacturing, and our relationship with technology itself. Let's start with the timelines, because I know that's what everybody wants to know. When will we actually see bioactuators in commercial applications? The honest answer is that it depends on the application. If we're talking about artificial bioactuator muscles, we're looking at a staggered rollout over the next 10 to 20 years. If you're talking about the synthetic spider silk bioactuators, then that can occur much sooner, in the next 3 to 5 years, as they are more mechanical than biomechanical and operate on a separate track compared to living bioactuator systems. In the medical space, I expect to see the first commercial bioactuator applications to be within the next 5 to 7 years. The biocompatibility advantages are so compelling for certain medical applications that the current limitations of power and speed might be acceptable trade-offs. Think about drug delivery systems that can respond to biological signals, or implantable devices that can operate harmoniously with human tissue. For soft robotics and human-robot interaction applications, we're probably looking at 7 to 10 years. The safety advantages of compliant, biologically inspired actuators are significant enough that companies will likely accept the current performance limitations in exchange for systems that can safely work alongside humans. Industrial applications will probably take longer, maybe 10 to 15 years, because the performance requirements are more demanding. But even here, there might be niche applications where bioactuators' unique properties make them attractive despite their limitations. But here's where it gets really interesting: the potential for hybrid systems. We don't have to choose between biological and artificial actuators. The future might belong to systems that combine the best of both worlds. Imagine robots with traditional actuators for high power, high speed tasks, and bioactuators for fine manipulation and human interactions. These hybrid systems could potentially solve the rare earth crisis without completely abandoning the advantages of traditional actuators. If we can reduce the number of rare earth magnets needed in each robot by 50% or even 75%, we've made significant progress towards sustainability, even if we haven't eliminated them entirely. The manufacturing revolution that bioactuators represent is also worth considering. We're not just talking about new products, we're talking about entirely new manufacturing processes. The convergence of biotechnology and manufacturing technology could create opportunities for completely new industries. Let me paint you a picture of what the future might look like. Imagine walking into a factory in 2040. Instead of the loud industrial sounds of traditional manufacturing, you hear the quiet hum of bioactuators. Instead of smokestacks and industrial waste, you see systems that consume organic waste and produce useful products. The robots in this factory move with almost organic fluidity. They can work safely alongside humans because their actuators are inherently compliant. When they need repair, they don't require rare earth magnets shipped from halfway around the world. They can literally grow new components on site. The role of cloud-based manufacturing execution systems becomes even more crucial in this future. Managing biological processes requires sophisticated monitoring and control systems that can track thousands of parameters in real time. The MES platforms that we're developing today for pharmaceutical and biotech manufacturing are laying the groundwork for the bioactuator production systems of tomorrow. But here's what really gives me hope: the convergence of multiple technological revolutions. We're not just seeing advances in bioactuators, we're seeing simultaneous advances in AI, synthetic biology, advanced materials, and manufacturing technology. When these technologies combine, they create possibilities that none of them could achieve alone. Artificial intelligence is already being used to optimize biological processes, predict cell behavior, and control complex bioprocessing systems. As AI gets more sophisticated, it will be able to manage the complexity of biological manufacturing systems in ways that human operators never could. Synthetic biology is giving us the tools to engineer biological systems with unprecedented precision. Instead of using natural muscle tissue, we might be able to engineer custom muscle cells that are optimized for specific applications. Imagine muscle tissue that can operate at higher temperatures, generate more force, or respond to different control signals. The manufacturing technology revolution is giving us the tools to scale biological processes to industrial levels. The bioreactors, monitoring systems, and control technologies that are being developed for pharmaceutical manufacturing can be adapted for bioactuator production. But perhaps most importantly, we're seeing a generation of engineers and scientists who are comfortable working across disciplinary boundaries. The traditional silos between biology, engineering, and manufacturing are breaking down, creating opportunities for truly interdisciplinary innovation. This is where I want to issue a call to action. If you're working in manufacturing, start thinking about how biological processes might fit into your operations. If you're in robotics, consider how bioactuators might enable new applications that aren't possible with traditional actuators. If you're in biotechnology, think about how your expertise might be applied to engineering applications. The bioactuator revolution isn't going to happen automatically. It's going to require investment, research, and the willingness to take risks on unproven technologies. But the potential rewards, both economic and environmental, are enormous. For companies, the message is clear. Start experimenting with bioactuator technology now, even if commercial applications are still years away. The companies that develop expertise in this field early will have significant advantages when the technology matures. For investors, bioactuators represent a potentially massive opportunity. We're talking about a technology that could disrupt multiple industries simultaneously. The companies that can successfully commercialize bioactuator technology could be the next generation of technology giants. For governments, the strategic implications are significant. Countries that develop strong bioactuator capabilities could reduce their dependence on rare earth imports while building new technological capabilities. This isn't just about industrial policy, it's about national security and technological sovereignty. For students and researchers, bioactuators represent one of the most exciting frontiers in science and engineering. This is a field where fundamental research can have immediate, practical applications, where biology and engineering intersect in fascinating ways, and where the next breakthrough could come from anyone with a good idea and the persistence to pursue it. But here's my message of hope. We're not helpless in the face of supply chain challenges and geopolitical tensions. Human ingenuity has always found ways to overcome resource limitations and technological obstacles. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because we found better materials and better ways of using them. The rare earth crisis might seem daunting, but it's also an opportunity. It's forcing us to think creatively about alternatives and develop technologies that are more sustainable and resilient. Bioactuators, and particularly synthetic spider silk from companies like Bolt Threads, represents more than just a solution to the rare earth crisis. They represent a fundamentally different approach to technology, where we work with nature rather than against it. The future of robotics doesn't have to be held hostage by rare earth magnets mined from distant countries. It can be powered by the same biological processes that have sustained life on Earth for billions of years, and that future is being built right now in laboratories and companies around the world. The bioactuator revolution is just beginning, and the best part, we all get to be a part of it. In an industry where precision and compliance are paramount, Apprentice's Tempo platform offers a cutting-edge manufacturing execution system solution. It's cloud-based, mobile-first, operator-centric, with the most intuitive UI in the industry, making it perfect for today's dynamic pharmaceutical manufacturing environments and for the production of the world's most complex drug products. Whether you're working on groundbreaking cell and gene therapies, biologics, or small molecules, Tempo provides a fully validated MES system that's both powerful and easy to use. It streamlines your processes, ensures compliance, and adapts to your specific manufacturing needs. So get off of paper batch records and discover how Apprentice's Tempo Manufacturing Cloud can transform your operations by visiting us at apprentice.io. Attention industry professionals, revolutionize your manufacturing process with the Apprentice Tempo Manufacturing Cloud, a manufacturing execution system built to streamline your operations, boost efficiency, and ensure compliance all in one powerful platform. Experience the future of manufacturing with our free 30-day trial. Scan the QR code on your screen now to unlock a world of innovation. Don't just keep pace, set the tempo as an industry leader with Apprentice. That's all for Apprentice.io's Industry Insights. I'm Frank Maggiore. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for notifications when new episodes drop. Please comment on if you have any additional topics you would like for me to cover in this space, and we'll see you next week for more Industry Insights.